2.
Hello, my name is Robbins, and today I will be presenting on the Takata airbag case study. Moving on into the presentation agenda for today, we're going to start off with a brief introduction on Takata as a company, as well as some context as to why they found themselves in this dilemma. We're going to go over the actual situational dilemma itself and how it came to be, as well as the choices that Takata had in this situation, finalizing that with my personal recommendation on what they should have done. Then we're going to go over the exact violations and misconduct that Takata violated, as well as their ethical failures, and my recommendation on what they could have done to avoid that situation as well. Finally, we're going to go into some important lessons for business management derived from this case, as well as conclusion, and a final references slide. All right, so the Takata Corporation is a Tokyo-based vehicle safety manufacturing company. They've made things like seatbelts, but what they're most famous for, of course, is this airbag case study. They were founded in 1933, so they've been around for a very long time, once again, primarily focusing on public transportation. Just some context for this case, according to U.S. Newswire, the #1 cause of death for Americans are vehicle-related incidents. So, with as popular as automobiles are in the United States, it's obviously an extremely huge market for safety-related aspects for vehicles. So Takata had very famous clientele such as Nissan, Honda, BMW. Their goal was to get their airbags in just about every automotive manufacturer. And the best way to do this is to have a cost-effective airbag. So that brings us into the situational dilemma. Now, there's a certain chemical that Takata was using in their airbags that most airbag manufacturers refuse to use, and that is because it was already deemed unsafe. Regardless of the warnings, Takata chose to use this ammonium nitrate in their airbags to cut costs and to make their sales and stay relative in the competitive global market. When they first used this chemical, it's unknown whether or not that they knew it would be defective. It seems that they found that their airbags were perfectly fine in the 1990s when they were first manufacturing them. But nearly a decade after manufacturing, that's when the faulty test results started coming out, and the company ultimately did what they did. So going into the choices, obviously. So choice number 1, once Takata figured out that this chemical in their airbags, this metal in their airbags, was not only defective but dangerous to customers, they had the choice to continue producing the airbags and to basically omit the important data that their more recent studies were finding. In the 1990s, when they were running their tests, they didn't necessarily do a fully conclusive test. So the particular defect happened because of extreme humidity over time. So with their product testing, obviously they didn't do extreme humidity testing over time. Maybe they had a small sample size. Maybe they were lying right from the start. It's really hard to know exactly what happened because of all of the shady things that this company was involved in. However, it is definitely determined that nearly a decade after the first airbags were released, data was omitted. They called it XXing the data, so to speak. They just basically didn't release it to the public that these airbags were indeed dangerous. So while they continued producing airbags, they continued getting their airbags put into millions of vehicles, and they had significant cost savings because of these airbags and not reporting the problem to the public. Bringing it into choice number 2, so when they got the data that these airbags were faulty, had they released their proper findings, the airbags would not have passed the federal regulations required to have them in vehicles. So not only would they immediately have halted production and had to have released this dangerous information to the public, but they also would have had to recall all of the defective airbags, and this would have been extremely financially draining to the company. Obviously, they didn't choose this option. They went with the first one and ended up having to file for bankruptcy anyways because of their poor decision making. But my personal recommendation would have been to go to choice number 2. They should have just done the right thing They should have stopped production. They should have told the public. They should have recalled all the vehicles. It's really hard to say how many people died because they didn't recall this information, or they didn't push out the information fast enough. But regardless, just the amount of lives that they would have saved had they pushed this information out when they had it, it would have been tremendously impactful for all the families and individuals that were hurt by this company. Also, they had to pay a string of fees and pass a lot of new company policies that really should have been there in the first place. But they lost their freedom as a company, and it was very detrimental to the Takata name because they didn't go with choice number 2. So going into violations and misconduct. So the two main things that Takata did wrong were the manipulation of test results and defective product development. Both of these are violations of Section 5 of the Federal Trade Commissions Act per EFE News Service. So going to the manipulation of test results, right? This is an unfair and deceptive practice. So when you omit data or you fake data and you say, hey, this product is safe, you're not only deceiving consumers into thinking that what they're doing is safe, but you're also manipulating the businesses that you're selling your product to. So had Honda known, had Nissan known, had BMW known that these were defective airbags, they never would have put them in their cars in the first place. So these unfair and deceptive practices not just impacted the consumers driving the vehicles, but also the businesses that chose to adopt Takata for themselves. Hiding and manipulating test results, exaggerating their effectiveness. Had they not exaggerated the effectiveness of their airbags, they never would have been put in the vehicles in the first place. As far as defective product development goes, so federal motor vehicle safety standards are very, very specific. After this Takata recall, over 100 million vehicles had to be coming in for service, according to the EFE News Service. Basically, these vehicles never would have made it on the road had Takata been an honest company. So people living their daily lives now have economic damages as well. They have to take time off work. Their vehicles diminish in value. They can't resell their vehicles. This just caused a string of problems. There's just a complete violation of consumer protection laws. In terms of ethical failures, this is just an utter disregardment of public safety. You don't have to be a genius to determine that it's unethical to put people in danger, and that is exactly what Takata did. In terms of whistleblowing as an ethical failure, whistleblowing actually is not a negative thing. Whistleblowing actually protects the public. It's something that should be encouraged within a company, and clearly the people running the tests at Takata didn't feel safe dispersing this information to the public. So as an ethical failure as a company, they clearly don't encourage open communication for their employees. In terms of a better course of conduct, Takata definitely needed to open up better lines of communication in their company, whether this is through an increase in the human resources department or just emailing in general. It seems like a lot of the information was kept kind of hidden at an executive level, and that's obviously a problem. In terms of gossip that's going around, if somebody hears gossip, even if they have no way of actually proving it, it's something that should be brought to the attention. Spreading rumors like, oh, hey, I heard some of our airbags might be faulty. Well, it might just seem like a rumor. It's something that should heavily be investigated by a company. Ensuring validity is another thing. I mean, at every point of a business, especially a business that's producing something, the validity of the data needs to be verified. If you have your own people running the tests, there's a bias. It's recommended that you bring in a third party or somebody with a special interest of finding something wrong in order to ensure the validity of any sort of test for your business. In terms of lessons for business management, whistleblowing is something that should be encouraged. If you have something wrong in your company, rewarding whistleblowers to keep things internal. So there are two types of whistleblowers, and those are the ones that would bring something up to upper management, and then there are the ones who go public with the information. The ones that go public with the information are usually because they feel like they can't be heard within their own company. So encouraging open communication is definitely a key to make sure that employees not only feel like they're heard, but also feel like they can make a difference if something's actually going wrong inside of the company. Lastly, just prioritizing quality control. If you're prioritizing taking shortcuts and cutting costs and getting off work early, you're not going to have quality within your business, and your products are going to reflect that, as in the case of the Takata airbag company. In conclusion, safety is always going to be worth more than profit. If you're risking your customers and your employees' livelihood just to make a couple of extra bucks, chances are it's going to come back to bite you. Taking shortcuts in a business is not an effective way to run a company. Once again, with the airbag dilemma, they had a chemical, they had a metal that was found to be dangerous, and instead of doing more research and running more tests, they said, yep, we can make cheap airbags. This is the way to go. This is what we're going to do. If you take shortcuts, eventually your competitors will surpass you, or there'll be other negative consequences. Lastly, production should always be monitored at all levels, from its inception to its ending. Before it gets sold to the consumer, before you put someone else's life at risk, you should always monitor your production at all levels. This concludes my presentation, and this is my reference slide.